Oh, sorry about that.
Okay, and we're live. Hey guys, welcome to the show. I'm going to be talking tonight to the guys over from Head in the Office, which is a really good political podcast from a left-wing perspective that I've been listening to for a couple of months now, and it's great to have you guys here.
Oh, it's great to be here. I'm Gage. I'm one of the guys on Head in the Office.
Jeremy, second half of Head in the Office. Happy to be here.
Oh my god, it's so funny because the entire time I've been watching the podcast, like I did not know which of you was Jeremy and which of you was Gage.
We
I don't think you guys
a couple times.
Yeah. Like I don't think you guys specify that often. And I found out like a few days ago. So I was like, I should probably know this before I interviewed you.
Yeah, because we don't refer to each other like on the podcast either. It's just us. So it'd be awkward, So yeah, I totally get it.
All right, but we can head right into it. So for anyone out there who doesn't know who you guys are, would you mind telling me a little bit about yourselves and what you do?
Oh goodness. Well, Jeremy, you can take it away if you want.
Sure. I'm Jeremy. I'm, as I said, one half of the Head in the Office podcast. I feel like personal background stuff isn't all that interesting, at least when it comes to me. I mean, we're both Michiganders, freshly graduated from undergraduate college studies. We started the podcast back in 2021, in July of 2021, really just with the intent of covering the news, talking about politics, because we talked individually with each other about politics before we started pressing the record button. And then over time, we gained a following. More and more people wanted to hear what we had to say. We were kept afloat by the glorious generosity of the people over on our Patreon. Yes. And we've been able to do a lot of fun stuff. Most recently, we did a presidential debate event over on our Discord in lieu of us doing our regular live stream because I broke my goddamn elbow. And then before that, we did a debate for the debate that Joe Biden was in, which was a disaster, but we raised a couple $1,000s for the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, which is really cool. But other than all that, we do a podcast, weekly episodes, Head in the Office on all platforms, covering the news, laughing where we can, and trying not to be too doomer.
Yeah, you can check us out on TikTok to just get a brief taste of the highlights if you want to see what you're going to get yourself into. But overall, we just kind of cover politics from a pretty progressive perspective, but try to inject more brevity into what's going on every week rather than being all doom and gloom about it.
Yeah. Quick question. How old are you guys?
23.
Both of us, yeah.
Oh my god, I'm 23 too.
Yeah, we're the same age.
Okay, I always thought you guys were a little bit older than me. Okay.
Oh, no, not me.
Young bucks.
Young bucks, that's right.
Yeah, I don't know. I tend to assume people are just older than me, so try not to take it personally, maybe.
Yeah, it's no problem.
But I want to say I absolutely love your guys' show. I think it's funny and informative in a way that's frankly really refreshing, especially in left-wing spaces. Yeah. And I'd love to hear you guys basically talk about how you started and what your general approach to the show has been.
Oh goodness, how we started, it was really honestly just taking it out the PlayStation party and just recording it and thinking maybe some people will think the way we talk about politics, the things we have to say, is funny and informative, like you said, and it looks like maybe it's working for some people. Overall, it really didn't take much. It was just maybe we could do this thing. Maybe we could do it.
And I would just add, you mentioned leftist spaces. I think so often leftists get a big head about how much they know and how educated they are on a variety of issues, and some of it is deserved. Like we spend a good leftist spends a lot of time learning about various social dynamics, but I think along with that often comes inaccessibility for the average person. And me being, I don't know, somebody ensconced in politics even before the podcast, I just had a feeling that politics is very important. It decides a whole lot of things in our lives. And it'd be a lot better if the average person had a bit easier access to the news and current trends and stuff like that. And so that's sort of the goal, is to make politics, and especially a left-wing perspective, a leftist perspective, more accessible to the average person, not being high and mighty, not grandstanding, not doing any moral gatekeeping or anything like that. Just trying to present the news in a digestible way that doesn't make people feel all doom and gloom. without alienating any group. I'm sure we've alienated some people. I mean, we got cooked when we
Yes.
advocated for voting for Joe Biden before he dropped out of the race for harm reduction purposes. But I think we do what we can to remain accessible. And if we ever get to a point where the average person feels they can't listen to us, then I'll feel we're going astray. But for now, I think we're doing all right.
Yeah.
No, you guys are doing great. Like I try not to be like explicitly partisan in my content, but like on the lives, I'm more like willing to say that I'm definitely a person on the left. And I like if anyone's watched these lives before, they would know that. And in my experience, just people tend to really associate like being smarter with being more doomer, especially people our age. Like it's just so much like trying to out lefty each other, and sometimes it just feels like super impractical and super just disheartening in a lot of ways. Just like, have you guys ever seen that meme? It's like the person who says they're gonna firebomb a Walmart and doesn't firebomb a Walmart.
Yes,
I know
Like
exactly what you're talking about.
That's just, oh my god, that's what it feels like to be on Twitter so often.
Absolutely. And
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry about that. That was something that we wanted to hit on, like kind of when we started it. When we talk about accessibility, a lot of that accessibility comes from providing a leftist or progressive space that isn't filled with kind of this like moral purity testing. Because I think there's a lot of that goes on, and there's a lot of that, especially on left Twitter, that kind of just alienates people away from the causes, you know?
Yeah. And that's not to say that we're like without dogma, you know, like when it comes to the rights of LGBTQ people or ethnic minorities in this country, especially like more recently, like Haitian immigrants are being demonized repeatedly by JD Vance and Donald Trump and other Republicans. Like we do have things that we won't negotiate on, but the goal is to fully explain those positions, starting from a basis of, you know, everyone deserves to be treated equally. People deserve to be happy and, you know, pursue things that they're interested in, that sort of thing. So it's not as though we're like without principle, I guess, you know, because the centrist types will try to appeal to everybody, you know, thinking of people like Joe Rogan, where they'll literally listen to anybody, what anyone has to say. That's not what we do. Never will be, I don't think.
We try to tailor our rhetoric in a way that attempts to meet people where they're at. Sometimes it works better than others. It depends on what we're talking about, because some topics you kind of got to be a little more left wing, I guess, to understand. But overall, we try with, I guess, humor to just meet people where they are and show them that things can be a bit more fun sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's like what you said about harm reduction when it comes to voting for Biden. You know, like politics at the end of the day, and at the end of the day, should be more about sort of convincing other people and trying to get them to come along than just like being right and trying to be better than them. You know, and oh my god, I haven't streamed. The last live stream that I did was when Joe Biden dropped out. So I haven't talked about a lot of this stuff. But the Haitian immigrant stuff has been so crazy. Like after, dude, like I live in South Florida. We have a lot of Haitian immigrants.
God bless
like,
you.
Dude, we've like literally never heard anything like this. Like I've lived here my entire life. Like I've had Haitian friends my entire life. And that shit just came out of nowhere, dude. Like,
and I mean, to be fair, the people in Springfield, Ohio, never heard anything about this either until JD Vance started spewing it all over the place, and then Trump platformed it at the debate. It's just completely manufactured, but people have latched on.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of sort of what I try to talk about on my channel is kind of like understanding politics on a personal level when it comes to the leadership. Like I really like looking at like presidents and sort of like what makes them tick, why were they effective, why were they not effective, and the sort of like the whole theory that people have around Trump is this sort of like this chaos agent, you know, almost like Ronald Reagan was he was an actor and he was really charismatic and able to speak to that era despite like whatever you think of his policies. And Trump was kind of like a perfect fit for our current era because he's like the reality TV show guy, you know, like he was trashy and he could tweet. But Trump's just kind of like lost it lately in a really weird way. Like, I don't know if like we've just kind of moved on and gotten tired of his antics, if the Democrats are messaging better against him than they used to, or if he's just kind of older. Or, I mean, he also got shot at. Like, I'm sure that
Yeah.
probably doesn't help his confidence. So I'm kind of curious what you guys sort of read as like the difference between the current Trump campaign and the last two, and how do you think that's going to play out in this election, especially given just like the sheer amount of weird craziness that we've had.
Well, I feel like in the 2016 campaign, he was considered to be behind almost the entire time. So it's not necessarily. I think there is a difference, and I think what you're touching on is real. But in terms of like polling statistics, he was behind in 2016 as well. He was really behind in 2020. Of course, he lost then. But I think it's a combination of he lost the sauce, like cognitively, he's not doing as well as he was before. But he also has an entire 4 years of policies and public administration to hang around his neck now. I mean, there were a number of just awful policies, from the massive tax cuts that he gave to billionaires and giant corporations to basically all of his policy in the Middle East, spearheaded by Jared Kushner. I mean, there's tons of things you can point to that I don't think people like very much. And I think, you know, for as much as Trump is a personality, I think he's also a sort of reflection of the material condition or the material state of the country. He obviously lies a lot, but he speaks to a frustration that people have that they feel Democrats don't often speak to, right? People struggle to pay for rent. People struggle to pay for food. They want to send their kids to good colleges and stuff like that. And for the Hillary Clinton campaign, I mean, they didn't speak enough to that, nearly enough. And Hillary Clinton was also a terrible candidate. I think Kamala Harris is making a lot of right decisions in that regard, but they still get to do that economic populism. I mean, JD Vance frames his hate of Haitian immigrants as a sort of economic populism, right? He's saying that the reason inflation is so high is because we've let, 25 billion people in, or whatever the number is nowadays. But my point here is that I think Trump's lost the sauce a little bit, but also Democrats have gotten a slight bit better at the economic messaging. It could be a lot better. They could suck all the fascist oxygen out of the room in terms of economic populism if they wanted to. But I think that sort of combination of a confluence of factors has contributed to Trump struggling a bit more. Maybe it's mostly age, though. Maybe I'm just too hopeful, but I don't know.
I also think, like, speaking like electorally, right? I think part of the reason why he's lost the sauce, other than just being like, how old is he? 78?
Yeah.
Right? Like he's super old, cognitively declining. Like you can see it on the not the debate stage. Well, yeah, on the debate stage, on his speeches, his rallies and whatnot. I think a big part of why maybe people are kind of losing interest in him is, one, in 2016, he was just had this underdog effect. He was the anti-establishment guy. And in 2016, it's hard to believe, but his rhetoric was a lot more toned down, even though it was still like crazy. He was not saying the shit that he was saying right now, and to the level that he was saying it back in 2016. You go back and look at clips from him back then, it was not even like the same guy. It really isn't. I don't understand how it got worse. I didn't think it could get worse than, like, it used to be MS-13 is coming across the border, bad enough. Already bad, vile, disgusting. And now it's literally, what did he say at the Biden debate? Immigrants are coming over from Guatemala to do something, and then Joe Biden agreed they're coming over to assault women. And then he said there are there are immigrants flooding across the southern border to get gender reassignment surgery. That's not something 2016 Trump would have said. And I think that's something that's meaningfully off-putting to the people who actually matter when it comes to winning elections, which are moderates.
Yeah, I mean, there's also like Roe v. Wade, a lot of people are not happy with him about that, reasonably so. And like I said, tons of policies you can point to from his first administration. But ultimately, I think the cognitive ability of Trump has gone down quite a lot. And I don't know. My fear is that the people will think back to Trump's 4 years and think, wow, that was crazy. Roe v. Wade got overturned. That was really awful. But the economy wasn't so bad, even though there's tons of misconceptions within that view itself. And if Democrats don't go a little bit harder, I think, on the left-wing economic populism, it makes it a lot easier for Trump and JD Vance to lie about them wanting to say, bring rent down or bring the cost of groceries down. That's always been my issue with Democrats, is they just don't adopt the rhetoric that they need to for a variety of reasons. But
I guess to continue a little bit on that point, like I was a really big Bernie guy in 2020, And
Oh, yeah.
I remember like when Bernie lost, I was like, oh, like this is like the like
It's
the
rigged.
media, yeah, like it's
Yeah.
rigged and this and that. And like today I have a bit of a different perspective, because at the end of the day, like politics is about winning. Like you got to be able to win even if things are set up against you. Like things were set up
Mhm.
against Trump in 2016 and he still managed
Yeah,
to do it.
exactly.
But like looking back, I was like, oh, like this is the sort of moment for like the economic populism. This is the moment for like a progressive movement to come through. But it turned out that after 4 years of Trump craziness, all that it sort of took was being like, hey, I'm a old like white guy and I'm normal and I'm moderate and I can steer the ship. And that's sort of like the thesis behind Joe Biden winning in 2020. And that goes back to sort of like pendulum theory, right? Like every president that gets elected is sort of like the polar opposite of like the last one that we had. And I'm sort of worried a little bit for 2024 of if this would actually be the sort of like moment where economic populism could make a difference, or if like I know you guys say the mind of the median voter is a dark place,
Yes.
or if the sort of just like Trump bad, Trump is weird, like if that sort of angle is going to make more of a difference for people in our current like conversation.
I don't. I do think the like Trump bad, Trump weird is making a difference specifically because of how uniquely bad and weird him and JD Vance are being. And honestly, a lot of this is being carried by JD Vance. Historically bad pick, right?
Yeah.
I think he's just acting in a way that's just so like displeasing to just a regular person that the weird attacks do matter. And I think the economic populism is harder from a left wing perspective right now because the vibes of the Trump economy are so good. You know what I mean? Even though there's a lot of issues that were going on back then, people generally remember that time, especially contrasted to COVID, because COVID largely has fallen on Joe Biden. They haven't counter messaged around that like too often, how it's a lot of this can actually be pinned on Trump. But when you compare those two economies, the vibes are so much more stacked against the Democrats that it is hard to economically message a little bit. But I think they could always be doing better.
Yeah, I think the weird attacks work, especially with like a new story coming out about JD Vance like every week, or a new clip from like 2019 where he's saying something just insane about
Yeah.
women or motherhood in general. I think I like the weird attacks. It adopts a strategy that I think was absent really in 2016, where a lot of liberals would see something crazy Trump said and sort of pearl clutch about it. But now we are laughing at him, and I think that's a little bit more powerful, or maybe a lot more powerful, because what do you do when you get laughed at? Really, there's no real way to just brush that off. You kind of just have to sit down and take it. But I think for the most part, the Harris Walz campaign has been on point. But I don't know. There's so many different things to consider that it's impossible to tell what's going to happen. I mean, I don't even want to begin to try to predict.
Especially with polling so close. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, I mean, because I get worried like about the future of like the Democratic coalition, because you look at it like Dick Cheney coming in and becoming more like the sort of like PMC party, like and like the Kamala's like closeness with like tech guys and trying to appeal to them, and like the Lena Khan stuff with the SEC, even though they were like way too blatant about that publicly, and now I don't think they're going to be able to get rid of her. But I don't know, like I worry that they might get the wrong message from the Trump weird stuff.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Go ahead, Gage.
Oh, I see what you mean. I'm mostly worried that that they're going to take away the wrong lesson should they win this campaign, that they are going to have better electoral success turning right rather than actually genuinely engaging with left-wing policies. That's my biggest fear for like a Kamala win.
Yeah, Dick Cheney.
Dick Cheney endorsement is crazy.
Yeah, I sort of see it as a double-edged sword as well, because it's good to build a wider coalition, because then theoretically it's easier to win, right? Because you'd think that like the moderate types are more likely to turn out than the far leftists, which is probably why they try to appeal to the sort of middle median voter so often. But yeah, I mean, in terms of long-term strategy, I mean, I'm not trying to rub shoulders with Dick Cheney or Mitt Romney. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're demons. Dick Cheney's literally like one of the biggest villains still alive in American politics today. Maybe, I mean, not to get like too theory leftist, but Marx always talked about how in bourgeois democracy you have to make strange bedfellows, and when you finally get into power and sort of defeat reactionary forces, then is your chance to turn against the people that you were just teamed up with. But then again, of course, very few examples of leftists being successful in doing that. So I don't know. It's a difficult question. And if I knew how to contend with that, I feel like maybe I'd be leading the revolution. But I don't know. It's tough. It's a really hard conundrum for people like us.
And I also want to say, I don't want to pretend like I don't think there is any world where we can attempt to take voters from the right. Because, like, again, elections are won and lost on the margins. And I understand the strategy being that these are voters that are proven to turn out. And honestly, the left has to do a better job at actually driving people out into first primaries to show that we can get candidates onto the actual stage to be able to contend with these big elections and then actually get people elected. We just need to show up as a force, and then we can easier sell the idea that you can win by capitulating to us. And I think it's especially what is, I don't want to say dangerous, but alarming seeing how the Kamala campaign has gone, the Harris-Walz campaign has gone about appealing to right-wing voters when Joe Biden did win in 2020, running on one of the most progressive agendas in like modern history. It seems like they're just kind of forgetting that he ran on $15 minimum wage. He ran on student debt. Like, I don't know. It feels like we're dropping all of this.
And I feel like one at least small capitulation they made to the left, Kamala Harris did, was choosing Tim Walz. I mean, he was by far the most progressive option out of all of them. But at the same time, all of his policies that make him so progressive are sort of just absent on her campaign platform. Like, we don't see universal free school lunch. She doesn't talk about that. I think she should. It's an incredibly popular policy. But outside of that, like, I don't know really what she's doing to adopt the principles, or I suppose, I don't know, the things that make Tim Walz such a notorious figure in state politics. I think it's good that she chose him. I like Tim Walz. I think he was the best option after reflecting on it. But I mean, I don't know, some more rhetoric to that tune, to the same tune as Tim Walz, would be good. And ultimately, like, I don't think anybody's making a decision in this election based on who Dick Cheney is going to vote for. It's more of a sign that the old Republican establishment has sort of abandoned Donald Trump. And I don't think Kamala Harris was like necessarily fishing for the Dick Cheney endorsement, but I think you can win those same voters through, again, economic populist rhetoric. You're going to lose the more moderates that think, every single dollar the government spends is a dollar that your grocery bill goes up. But I think you get more people than you lose in that scenario. And that's the sort of thesis that leftists have been talking about since Bernie joined the presidential race in 2016. But who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because so much of our politics is just vibes based.
Yes.
Like, Kamala gets inherently perceived as more progressive just because she's a black woman. And I think that's part of the reason why Joe Biden was able to get like a fair amount of like good, like progressive policies done, was just because he codes as like such a moderate figure. Like, no one would, like, the median voter probably wouldn't have thought of Joe Biden as more progressive than Barack Obama. Like, that's an insane thing to say. Like, looking at their entire careers.
As somebody who like knows, like, I still can hardly wrap my head around it. It feels like dirty to say.
Yeah, I mean, there is that sort of argument that like someone more moderate coded, like if you look at like Lyndon Johnson back in the 60s, like he was pretty conservative for most of his career. Then he becomes president and he sort of stabs the back of all the Southern Democrats that helped get him there. And he's like, hey, we're going to pass civil rights. And they were like, what? Like, it's interesting. And I was thinking a lot too about like when you were talking about the sort of like young, like more left-wing voters that don't really show up. Like, George McGovern was running against Richard Nixon in 1972, and he was super anti-war, and he had like all this youth support and all like this like popular movement behind him. And then election night comes around, and he was super disappointed because he got like 50% of the youth vote.
Damn.
like shattered my like my entire world. I was like, damn, they really just do not come out as much as they need to. And I like it in that way. It comes back to turnout, right? And that's why so much of like the early days of the Kamala campaign felt so magical, I guess, to a lot of people online. Was like they were actually excited. They were actually going to come out. So I guess we got to see how that ends up. I don't know. It sort of made me think about that.
And I mean, getting youth to turn out, getting the 18 to 25s to turn out is literally the $1 million question. Like that's what everyone is trying to do. But I guess what we try and push forward is that the thing they have not tried is kind of is doing the populism, but actually backing it up with policies that will make people's lives better. And I will give Joe Biden credit domestically very importantly.
Yes, importantly.
That he tried and he does continue trying to get student loan forgiveness through. A good policy that would just help people. But where that kind of gap is, where the knowledge gap is between, I guess, the median voter or the youth voter that doesn't want to turn out and what's actually going on, is this idea that, well, you actually have to go back to Trump's presidency. And because Hillary Clinton didn't win, Trump was able to appoint the 3 Supreme Court justices, and it's the SCOTUS justices that are knocking down these decisions. And there's actually like the legacy of Trump that's stopping Joe Biden from being as progressive as he's trying and getting these things done that you want to be done.
Yeah, but then the moment you start talking about like the advice and consent of the Senate to appoint Supreme Court justices, like the young voters fall asleep. You know what I'm saying? Like I too yearn for the day that young voters can prove themselves to be a formidable political force, but a lot of them are just unwilling to turn out or don't think about it or have other things going on. Like there's a ton of different factors, but it's tough. And I hope things change, but I'm not. I don't want to say I'm not hopeful because I always try to be hopeful, but I'm not convinced. I suppose that young voters are going to turn out huge this election because 2020 everyone thought they were going to turn out huge, and they turned out bigger than they had before in 2020 and 2022. But that was still like what 30% or something like that nationwide was the voter turnout rate. U.S. voter turnout rate abysmal as is. Like I think we maxed out at like 65 or something. But 30% for the young cohort is not a great number. They are overwhelmingly left wing, but there's not enough of them turning out.
Yeah. Well, I'm originally from Brazil, and we actually had compulsory voting, which would not work in the U.S. for like a variety of reasons. But I just it's an interesting like stark difference, you know. But like as we talk about like the youth vote, I'm curious to sort of hear about your guys' own formative political moments and like what made you get into politics. Like for me, it was definitely like Trump's 2016 campaign. I assume it'll probably be a big thing for you guys as well.
Honestly, the Trump 2016 campaign flew under my radar because we were 15 when Trump was running in 2016. Yeah. I was a dumbass. I honestly did not pay much attention to politics in my youth. And it wasn't until I started in college that I started to think more about these things, start to think about it. And then it was honestly the George Floyd protests and the pandemic. Watching, what was it, a $1.5 trillion wealth transfer from the poorest people in the country to the 10 richest over the course of the pandemic, or at least that first year. Those two things were so immensely formative in how I thought about things. Then I discovered other content creators like Hassan and Majority Report that kind of spoke to what I was feeling and the gap that I felt that the mainstream outlets, CNN and whatnot, were not covering.
Yeah, I mean, mine's similar, of course. Watching, I mean, I already knew sort of through osmosis culturally that Trump was a bad dude. I understood as broadly as I could that some of his policies were bad. But then, of course, learning more as I entered college for the first year that was then cut off by COVID, seeing like 200,000 people die, mostly because Trump refused to do anything about the COVID-19 pandemic because he thought it would hurt his election chances was insane. And then, of course, as Gage mentioned, Black Lives Matter protests, insane transfers of wealth, learning about more issues related to wealth inequality, me, myself being burdened with student debt, and then further looking into the issue and learning that like 40 million Americans are burdened with student debt, this enormous economic shackle that not only inhibits the growth of the country, but also restricts my own freedom because now I have to pay down, $30,000-$40,000 in debt for the next 10 years or whatever. It's learning about a lot of these issues tended towards my radicalization, I guess you could say. And then I guess at some point, Gage and I collectively decided to pick up the mics and try to start talking about it.
Wow, that's funny. That's so different from mine. Well, I guess it's kind of similar in a way, because I was also a 15-year-old dumbass when Trump was elected, but I sort of just remember seeing like all the like crazy stuff he said on Facebook and like sharing like, oh my god, he said this crazy thing. Look at this crazy thing that Trump said. Like I was like posting like a middle-aged like wine mom when I was like 15. I don't know why.
With the
and like it was weird
and the sideways laughy faces.
No, like my it got to the point where like one of my dad's friends like shared like a anti-Hillary thing and like tagged me in it. Was like, hey, look at this. And I was like, this is
That's
so
crazy.
weird, bro. What are you doing? And I was like watching the Daily Show and like all the late night stuff. And being like,
word,
this is political commentary, And I sort of like, I think 2020 was probably like a big turning point because I was the same.
Oh, you just muted yourself.
I think you muted your mic. Oh.
Uh-oh.
Oh, shit. Still muted?
Looks like it's our live stream now.
Yeah, what's up? Yeah.
Not getting anything.
I'm not getting... Oh, there we are. We're good now. I think, actually.
I heard a squeak.
Yeah,
all right, what's good, chat?
Welcome back to Head in the Office. We're here with our guest, Andre.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. I think I just heard something.
It's choppy.
Yeah. That's tough. We're no strangers to technical difficulties. You know what I mean? This is
liberal audio engineering. Oh my god,
it's ridiculous.
Okay,
this live stream.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, nice. I like my MacBook port is cooked, and I like kind of touch the cord, and it just
that happens to me sometimes too. Totally get it, King. Totally get it.
Sorry, but I was saying like 2020. I think my politics sort of became more real. Like a lot of the similar stuff you guys were touching on, and I feel like the sort of big theme for me is this election around. I feel a lot more practical. Like I feel a lot less sort of like preachy about my politics, and like I said earlier, I think like that's something I've appreciated your podcast so much for, is sort of combining that ideology with the pragmatism. And I know we talked a lot before about how these sort of like left conversations can be self-defeating, and how like I'm curious how like conscious of an effort that was for you guys versus just like the way that you naturally thought. Like was that something that you had to really like make a decision for, or was it just more natural to you guys?
You mean like practicality?
Yeah, like just the sort of like the harm reduction in voting for Biden, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always been a long trend in, I guess, sort of like leftist thought or leftist theory for being very analytical. And don't get me wrong, there's tons and tons of like leftist authors you could find that advocate against voting. And I'm not saying that like your knowledge of theory dictates how much you know about politics or how good your positions are or anything like that. But I like to think of myself as somebody who, I don't know, reasons through all of my positions. And fundamentally, I think that if you don't win, if you can't enact your political program, it doesn't really matter. And yeah, we have a broken democratic system. The Electoral College fundamentally favors conservatives, but you got to act within the system unless you're going to burn it all down. And I don't see anybody starting a revolution anytime soon. People can talk about wanting to do it all they want. Like you said, firebomb a Walmart, and then they don't firebomb a Walmart. But you have to deal with the system as it's presented to you. And ultimately, I think that we can get a lot more done under a liberal administration that, you know, maybe at worst is ambivalent towards us than we can under a Republican administration that's actively hostile. And I don't say this without reason. Like the NLRB under Joe Biden has been one of the best maybe ever for labor unions. And that's just because we got a Democratic president in. Like it's the result of not having 4 more years of Donald Trump, where he had an NLRB that was very hostile towards unions, that cut overtime protections and a bunch of other things. So practicality, I think, just comes along with politics. If you can't get done what you're trying to get done, or at least some version of it, it doesn't matter much to me. We can talk all about these ideas as much as we want, but at the end of the day, I'm not trying to be the smuggest person in front of the firing squad. I'm trying to win political power,
Exactly. I think it's also like the way that we run the show lends itself more to having these like more pragmatic and practical discussions. We cover a lot of just like what is going on across the nation, what is going on federally. What was it, like last year, I think, when trans issues were huge, we would do basically every show. There was a new state somewhere, whether it be Missouri, Kentucky, or something, that had enacted some ridiculous law that restricted the rights of trans people or trans kids and whatnot. I think just like the way that we kind of cover these things lends itself to talking about issues that people are actually currently facing in a more tangible way. Because a lot of these like online debates are just arguing over minutia for things that are so much further down the line than where we actually are right now. And I've just never seen like, or felt like there was much value in that in this current political moment. I think it's ultimately important and it's fun to theorize, but right now we actually need to change things.
Yeah, I think people are more willing to take a risk on sort of radical changes like universal healthcare, for example, if they feel like they're in a stable position economically, which people really aren't right now. And people aren't going to feel that way if we continue to elect Republicans that squeeze more and more from the working class, even if they do this sort of phony, fake right-wing version of economic populism. And I think that's part of the reason why Joe Biden got elected or got chosen during the primary in 2020, is because people were so deathly afraid of another Trump administration. If people can be a little bit more hopeful, I think they're more willing to take a risk on these bigger, more wholesale changes. But again, we don't get there with more Republicans in office that simply make things worse for literally everybody. Leftists don't like to admit it, especially the non-voting leftist type. But like Roe v. Wade getting overturned was a result of Hillary Clinton losing. And that's not to say the DNC is blame-free. They should have ran a better candidate. Bernie Sanders should have been the guy. But Hillary Clinton losing in 2016 is the reason Roe v. Wade isn't in place anymore. Sure, Democrats should have done something beforehand. They should have codified it 50 years ago, or whenever they had the votes to do so, if that was ever the scenario. But electoral outcomes matter. And to the extent that they matter, we should engage with them and try to make them go our way, even if only a little bit.
Exactly. If as much as it sucks to advocate for people at least having voted for Hillary, if Hillary would have won in 2016, we would still have Chevron. Like, we wouldn't have to worry about the collapse of the administrative state. We would still have a number of things on a long list of awful Supreme Court decisions that have come through. Like,
yeah, no, I've argued that before on the channel that I think Bernie probably would have won 2016. I think it was just like an outsider, just anti-establishment year. And Hillary Clinton, God, like people, as much as we talk about Trump, like Hillary Clinton was such a shit.
Terrible.
Like, imagine losing to Donald Trump, dude.
Only like, somehow, and she's still relevant in the party. Like, she's got a speaking spot at the DNC. She should be exiled from every political event ever for the Democrats. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, it's embarrassing. Like, that's the thing about it that's so funny is like I think Joe Biden also would have won 2016, by the way, if he had run. Yeah. Like, she was just so uniquely bad. And I remember, because I remember like being 15 and someone being like, yeah, Hillary would just be like more Obama. And I remember being young and thinking like, what's so bad about more Obama? Because I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
And that sort of like that sanctimony, I think, unfortunately has just like become a bigger part of the Democratic Party. And that's like why you still have the Hillary Clintons around, why you still have this sort of vibes that are difficult to kind of coalesce, like the better instincts of the Democratic Party with those less desirable qualities, I guess, which It makes me sort of think about like the direction of things going forward. Like what does the Democratic Party look like after a Kamala presidency? Or like who do we nominate next if Kamala doesn't win? Like where do you guys think that this is going?
Oh God, we'd probably
I
nominate
have
Dick Cheney next. Honestly, if Kamala Harris loses, I think if in terms like if the Democratic Party stays being ran by motherfuckers like Jamie Harrison, I think we are going to Democratic Party is going to be more conservative next time around. They are sort of taking a gamble with it being Kamala Harris, although I don't think it was entirely the sort of establishment's choice. They were sort of forced into getting Joe Biden off the ticket by that terrible debate performance. But I think if Kamala Harris loses, I am not confident that we're going to get a more progressive option unless there's a major power struggle within the party on behalf of like the more progressive AOC type left. But I don't think they have enough power to make that happen. Ultimately, it comes down to voters and like the primary system. But we know that the party apparatus is a very powerful thing. But if Harris wins, she'd probably run again because she's young enough to do so. I don't think she'll be cognitively declined like the same way Joe Biden has. So we probably get her for 8 years. I desperately hope that we take more of a turn towards the sort of left-wing economic populism we've been talking about, if only because I think it's the best repellent against the fascist JD Vance Trump types. But I don't know. It's hard to tell, and I don't have much hope in the party as its own. It's weird talking about it because we like obviously the party does its own thing. As an individual, I have very little influence over the party, but in a democracy, as much as we have one, we do sort of decide in a way collectively where we're going to go, even if it's an imperfect system. And so I don't want to make it seem like we have no agency, like the party's powerful, but at the end of the day, we collectively as a group of people, or maybe the Democratic electorate, do get to decide where we go. We just have to really make it happen. And it's incumbent upon us to try to make that happen.
Yeah, and it's also like I want to add this idea that like the Democrats at this like big levels need to focus on this economic populism, and they just need to be I don't know, generally more appealing to like the average person. The average person in the electorate isn't necessarily unfounded. I mean, we talk about it all the time on our show, but like look at the Midwest versus the East and West Coast Democrats. Democrats in the Midwest are damn near Karl Marx, and the Democrats on the East and West Coast are just Clintons. You know what I mean? They're just more Hillary Clinton. It's this just party machine establishment that's unwilling to change. But here in the Midwest, where they have to fight for every single vote that they're getting, they are actually producing results. I mean, look at Tim Walz. Like, look at Tim Walz. Gretchen Whitmer has done pretty good things too. All of the progressive candidates, damn near all of the progressive candidates for VP were out of the Midwest.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point because in the Midwest, unlike in New York or California, these Democratic strongholds, like you said, Gage, Democrats have to fight for literally every single victory, and to do that, you really got to draw contrast. I mean, in Michigan, especially with abortion being on the ballot in 2022, we got the first trifecta for Democrats, I think, in like 40 years. Similar thing happened in Minnesota, and like transformative policy changes after that because they have control of the entire state government. It's not perfect, obviously, but it is more progressive policy on a state level than we've seen out of these states in a very long time, especially Michigan with Republicans having control of some part of government for a while. And I hope that the Midwest type candidates are able to seize power more than your Gavin Newsom types. I think Gavin Newsom should be kept away from all things federal government forever. Not necessarily because California is terrible. I know there's a whole lot of nuance there, but because the type of politician that he is, I think will bring us back eventually to somebody like Donald Trump. Maybe it's JD Vance, maybe it's a Ron DeSantis if he can stop being so awful. But who knows? I really just hope we embrace the sort of Midwest renaissance we've seen as of late.
And just to kind of like speak more on that, I'm pretty sure one of the first things that the Democratic trifecta did in Michigan was codify abortion rights within the state. Like it's something that's the type of smoke that I would love to see on the national level if we could ever get there again. You know what I mean? But I'm just not confident that it would happen if we had a Newsom or some of these other cats.
God, you guys are reminding me of how much the Florida Democratic Party fucking sucks, man. Like when they could not do anything. You know who we ran against DeSantis? A former Republican
Oh,
governor.
I was gonna
Like
say we covered that. He
garbage.
Yes.
sucked.
Garbage, dude. Oh my God. Literally
I'm
zero
scared. Oh
power.
my goodness.
Like
I'm
Florida,
scared that
Florida was a purple state my entire life. Like I don't
Mhm.
know what happened
Obama won
in
it.
like the last 8 years, dude. I like Florida, and also it's just so far right. Like there's Trump signs everywhere where I live, and I live in like the bluest part of Florida. Is the
damn.
crazy part. Like they're just really, really loud about it here. Like there's this sort of excitement that there just isn't for Democrats. I like just started seeing some Harris Walls stickers, and it I don't know. It's crazy because the Midwest really is having a moment right now. Like
Yeah, it
props to
is.
you guys because the rest of us like we're struggling. Like I don't know why Democrats are fumbling Florida so hard.
Yeah, that's such an interesting like case too, because like what did voters really fuck with DeSantis and what he did, just not locking down Florida? I
I
don't
guess
understand why we
so.
turned so hard red.
Yeah, like well, because Gillum lost the governorship in 2018 by less than a point.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
crazy how close that was, and I think DeSantis won by like 12 in
Oh, this most
2022.
recent
Like,
election? Yeah.
like that, like it was a crazy number, and I think it really was just COVID. Like before COVID, no one really talked about DeSantis that much, and then after that, like you started seeing stickers and signs and all these things. So
But I
It's like
also
that.
wonder how much like the old people migration flow into Florida affects things, because I know you get a lot of like retirees, but or maybe that's just like a myth, but that's like the sense I have.
we've had a lot of younger people moving here from blue states. A lot of just a lot of New York, mainly like New York,
Mm.
New
Yeah.
Jersey. It's and like it sucks especially because like I personally know like a couple people that like work from home in New York and that live in Florida
Mm.
and that
Oh,
are just like
okay.
driving up our rent prices like great. Like cost of living where I live has exploded like so much. Like it's
Yeah.
getting like damn near like New York prices. Like
I
to
was
live
gonna
in
say
South Florida, it's
Yeah.
insane.
there was a report that came out like, oh God, like a year or two ago that said Florida, like per income, is starting to be one of, if not the most expensive state to live in.
Yeah.
Like it's getting nuts. And would you say that like blue state migration is like what you're seeing with like what is it? Like people leaving California, like a lot of disaffected like Republicans coming into Florida because they want those red state politics. Yeah, that's what you.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
that
oh my
sucks.
god, and there's such weird Florida culture. Like there'll be like stickers on the cars that say like local and the L is an upside down Florida. Like it's
Come on,
become
brother.
more of like a thing and people just sort of adopting Florida culture. It's really, really weird. I
And the interesting thing to me about Florida too is like with Texas would be a blue state if they didn't cheat so hard. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Like they just purged 1 million people off the voter rolls. They do this shit regularly. The gerrymandering there is crazy. Like Texas, for all intents and purposes, should be a blue state. But now Florida, I don't get the same sense out of Florida. I don't know how Florida goes back to being a swing state again, because it seems pretty far gone in only like a few election cycles. But there is an abortion referendum on the ballot this year. So I'm excited to see Trump win by like 13 points and then abortion also win by like 15 points.
Just like
yeah, no,
minimum wage.
weed is also on the ballot.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
Oh,
weed
really?
and abortion are on the ballot. Like $15 minimum wage passed last time. Like
Yeah.
that, it
Passed
was
with a
crazy.
higher margin than Biden or Trump. Like the Florida voter is such a interesting thing. I don't
I
get
mean,
it.
Florida's also just like a weird state. Like I live in the Miami metro area, right? We're like
Okay.
3 big counties that have like a gigantic population, and then most of Florida is like desolate, other than like Orlando, Tampa, Jacksonville. So like it's like deep red with a couple blue spots, and I think those blue spots have just been getting a little bit redder after all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that sucks. That sucks.
We kind of went off topic, but I guess since we're talking about states, I'll ask you guys a little bit lighter of a question. Like I know you're from Michigan, the land of
Yeah.
Big Gretch.
Mm.
And I posted a map like last week of all the states that I had been to, and everyone was yelling at me to visit the Midwest more because I've only been to Chicago,
It's good
and
here.
I was gonna ask you guys about what am I missing up there?
Honestly, the Great Lakes are actually pretty cool. Like Sleeping Bear Dunes is fun. Are you into like nature, like hiking and stuff?
I've been trying to get into it. I went to the Grand
Okay.
Canyon like a month ago, and
Word. I know the Upper Peninsula, beautiful.
Yeah.
It's so nice. You go to like a Tequanimon Falls, you kayak under a rock, and I've heard it's just like a life-changing thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I
yeah,
think
we
there's a lot of like nature aspects you can see, especially in Michigan. Like there's just some insane like different national parks or state parks that you can go to. Those are a lot of fun. But also I'm a big advocate for Midwest cities. I live in Detroit.
Mhm.
The one thing I hate about it is I have to drive everywhere. But I think Detroit's a great city to be. Chicago, obviously, much bigger than Detroit, but also a fun city. Um, Midwest is great though, and no Ron DeSantis. That's a big one.
Yes.
Yeah, well, because I kind of wanted to kick off of that and ask you guys a little bit more about like Midwest politics, because I know we've been talking a lot about the sort of Midwest Democrats, and I'm curious why you guys think that they've been moving so much in that direction. Like I know it's a lot of the sort of like the more pro worker policies and everything like that, or I don't know if they're just fucking with the nature, but
Yeah, that's
if,
true.
Yeah, I think for a lot of states in the Midwest, especially in a state like Michigan, was very ravaged by the effects of deindustrialization over the last 30 years or so. It's not really happening much anymore because there's not much left to deindustrialize, but the economic effects were disastrous, and I mean throughout the country, but especially in the Midwest. And as we sort of claw back some of what we lost, although we're never really going to return to that former glory, I think a lot more people are open to the sort of left-wing economic messaging, pro-worker policies, but also at the same time, we see Republicans across the nation since 2016 replicating Donald Trump, his mannerisms, and his policies. And I think that's repulsive to a lot of people. And then, of course, in 2022, the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, which gets a lot of people to turn out in favor of Democrats. A pivotal time for Michigan, especially because we had Gretchen Whitmer running for re-election for governor. So I think it's a lot of different factors. And then, as we've already said, because Michigan, Pennsylvania, even Ohio a little bit, we're all considered swing states, or at least our state legislatures swing back and forth as much as they can. Democrats are forced to draw contrast if they ever want to win. And I wouldn't want to I guess forget about like the organizing power of a lot of people here in Michigan and in the Midwest. People have been working very hard to ensure that Democrats can win, and we've been winning here, and it's good, and I think it's had a tangible impact.
I also think like kind of specifically in Michigan, right? When Jeremy talked about like how we got hit hard here in the Midwest with deindustrialization, right? Michigan's home of the big three automakers. You can't go like two steps without running into someone whose father or grandfather worked for GM and lived off of a GM pension later in their life. Those kind of jobs just do not exist anymore for a lot of people who would have followed that path or wanted to follow in their parents' footsteps. That's just a reality they can't live with anymore, and they have to either get the same job without a pension and without just good pay, or they try and do something else and still struggle. So there's like there's a unique part of like the electorate there that I think is really fueling the pro union push around here.
Mhm. Yeah, well, that's interesting because like the general narrative that seems like has been coming out of everywhere is like the sort of like more working class, like white Americans are headed more for the Republican Party, while like more professional class ones are headed for the Democratic. And I'm curious on like why the Midwest in particular is having success with those voters. And because I know you're talking about like deindustrialization, but is there aspects of that do you think that you think could be applicable to areas like the Sun Belt, for example, or like Georgia?
That's tough. I
That's
don't
a
know.
good
I'm not
question.
as I'm not as familiar with politics of like other regions throughout the country. Um, I think, I mean, ultimately it's incumbent. I don't know. We see very weird trends out of a lot of different like individual states. Like North Carolina has been I think for Trump both times in the last 2 elections, yet they have a Democratic governor. I mean, hell, Kentucky has Andy Beshear as a Democratic governor, and it's fucking, that's the state that votes for Mitch McConnell. You know what I'm saying? Median
And
voters,
fucking Rand
insane.
Paul.
Yeah, like I think states do a lot of weird and funny things. States have different ways of electing people. Some states are gerrymandered to hell, like Ohio and Texas, that make it a lot easier for Republicans to win. I think, might be unsatisfying, but it might come down in part to the sort of tenacity of the state by state Democratic parties to actually get things done, and the people behind them too, obviously. I don't know that explains everything. I'm not an organizer myself. I know it's a very difficult job to have, and we say repeatedly, Democratic strategy is often not a real job. But I don't know. I think it's a combination of economic trends, of the Trump effect, of individual Democrats and their personalities, and of the parties behind them that actually try to make a difference. I don't know if I'd be able to comment on like how we say Florida or like Georgia at this point, but.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean it's rough, like learning more about American history, and you sort of look at like how FDR succeeded with like the New Deal coalition and how he was able to have such like a broad base of support. But then you realize like that a lot of his support was from the Southern Democrats, and a lot of that was like in part due to him leaving Black Americans out of the New Deal programs. And eventually the New Deal coalition that the Democratic Party used to stay in power is broken once we break towards civil rights. And that's sort of when we start having the intense racial polarization that we have today. And I don't know, that's been a little unfortunate to me to see just like the kind of death of American liberalism that came following like the Johnson era. Like you get Carter, who's already a lot more moderate, and then Ronald Reagan happens, and suddenly you can't be more liberal than Bill Clinton. Like expect to win an election.
Like Jimmy Carter is where like neoliberalism really started. I know Ronald Reagan is like the guy that ushered it forward on the global stage, but Jimmy Carter was sort of the beginning, and then obviously Bill Clinton was like the neoliberal of our time, at least on the Democratic side. And like, yeah, we really haven't fully recovered, except for certain cases like Gretchen Whitmer or I guess Andy Beshear, Tim Walz, and those type of characters. But we've yet to have one of them in the seat of the presidency, which is important for these kinds of trends. But I'd also say to like the sort of revival of this sort of xenophobic race, these sort of like xenophobic race narratives. I think obviously it's the fault of Republicans that push these sort of narratives, but also we see Democrats time and time again either refuse to combat the narratives or buy into them themselves. Like Gage said earlier on this live stream, Joe Biden was talking about immigrants coming over and doing like sexual assaults to people, or Kamala Harris or Democrats broadly have endorsed a border bill that almost is completely exactly what Donald Trump has been calling for. It only didn't pass because Trump wants to be able to run on the issue still. Buying into narratives around immigration or race or wokeness, as it's labeled today, makes it easier for these narratives to flourish, and your refusal to push back against them makes them more salient in the minds of voters and only hurts Democrats. As we've said before, you're not going to win the people that think there's a white genocide happening. They're never going to vote for Democrats, and refusing to push back against that narrative hurts your party and your electoral chances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, oh well, it's funny with Jimmy Carter is such an interesting president because he was like a big interruption of the trends that we were generally having. Like it was the first like big outsider of the time. Like Nixon, Johnson, Kennedy had all been senators, had all been like big Washington people, and Carter was just like this little charming governor out of Georgia who seemed like pretty harmless following the Nixon administration. But he was like a guy who should have never been president. Like like as like cool of a figure as Jimmy Carter is, he was like an engineer and he just was not a politician, like at his core. And that was like such a big learning experience for me, was like looking at politics in terms of like the personalities and who's actually able to accomplish stuff regardless of like the political experience or the political beliefs that they have. Like Joe Biden was able to be super effective domestically because he had 40 years of legislative experience, and that actually makes a difference. when you get someone like Barack Obama, who was in the Senate for 2 years before he announced that he was going to run. Like, that's absolutely insane. Like, that actually does make a difference with people. And I think that sort of we've kind of gotten away from the discussion of like experience in a way that like we sort of prioritize like outsider types like a Barack Obama or a Donald Trump, when in reality I think the progressive movement needs someone who does have that sort of like ability to work within Washington and ability to legislate along with the right ideas that I don't think is necessarily something we've had like before. Like Joe Biden's probably the best example of that, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it also comes down to like winning down ballot races as well. Like the presidency is important. I am also heartbroken that Bernie Sanders didn't win the presidency either of the times he's tried for it. But House races matter, Senate races matter, state legislative races matter, because those are also other political venues for us to get various policy proposals through. But then again, you know, the progressive left is a very small sliver of the left overall, as much as you can call the American left a real left wing on the world stage. And as we've been talking about repeatedly, we got to prove ourselves and show up in force. And that's sort of the mission, I suppose.
Yeah, like, how many... Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, how many like major left wing like national politicians do we really have? You know?
Yeah.
We got like a handful at most. You know what I mean? Bernie, AOC, other members of the squad, but then some of them lose their races because they're outspent in historic margins because of an issue that should not be going on. You know what I'm saying? But what I was gonna get into, just kind of following off of what you two were talking about, is like this. I guess kind of why we're experiencing this like rejection of experience within politics is because of these narratives that have been built up for so long about how politicians lie. And I'm not going to come out here and say politicians don't lie, because they do. They will lie to get elected. They will lie to make you happy. They will do all of that. But where we are missing, what we're missing in that conversation culturally is is just the context. Like, are they lying, or are they not able to get these things done? Is Joe Biden is lying when he said he wanted to get $15 minimum wage, continue the child tax credit, and do all this? Or was he not able to get this done because of all 50 Senate Republicans and Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema? Like, there's a difference there that does not translate, and it's not very easy to message around. You can't really put that idea into a 15-second unskippable ad on YouTube. But I think if we were able to, I guess, instill a bit more media literacy or political literacy into the population, things would be a lot better, and we would be able to better understand why people who have built relationships in the Senate, in the House for all of these years are good to have around, and that can make it easier to get their agenda done and make it so they lie less.
Yeah, I mean, you got to look at like how people in the past passed legislation. Like LBJ got civil rights done by like parading JFK's corpse like throughout the Senate, you know, and like getting all the racist Southerners to vote for him. So it's like sometimes it is a question of political talent, and other times it's like a matter of convenience. You know, like what is the moment? Like COVID could have been huge. Like COVID could have been like a huge resetting moment. And I think about that a lot. Like how much that Biden got done compared to what we could have gotten, or even what we would have gotten if it weren't for like Manchin or Sinema, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, what we could have done if it wasn't for Manchin or Sinema. Let me tell you, there's a whole list of things.
Well, because there's memes about Obama had like a Democratic trifecta, but then you look at his coalition, like the Southern Democrats that were in there, like we're never gonna like codify Roe v. Wade, we're never gonna do like these big progressive things. So it's a matter of like coalition building. It's a matter of being able to like work within that party structure.
And I think it also just comes down to rhetoric and the narratives that Democrats are willing to spin. Like Gage and I have ripped out hairs over the fact that Democrats rarely just say names. Like blame people directly. When Joe Biden was working on the whole Build Back Better, I understand it might not have been conducive to success to start yelling at Joe Manchin publicly. But after you know that it's not going to happen, or after you know that some big political opportunity has failed, start blaming people directly. Go to voters and say like, yeah, Mitch McConnell or Lindsey Graham or whoever voted down this policy because they want you to suffer and they hate you. Like, you got to start saying stuff like that, because that is where we are. Democrats don't got to lie about it. Republicans go out and do this very well. JD Vance will say that they're letting 25 million illegal immigrants in because they don't care about American values and they want your family to die and suffer. But Democrats can get out there, tell the truth, say that Republicans voted against the child tax credit because they don't want your kid to be able to eat. I mean, and this isn't like a foreign concept. I think it was it Lyndon Johnson that had an ad against whoever he was running against, Barry something, Goldwater, where he was like, yeah, Barry Goldwater's gonna nuke your kid. Like, that was the ad. We need to bring the spirit of that back. Be more serious and treat them as the demons they are.
Just bring smoke back into our politics. You know what I'm saying? But I do want to touch on something that you, Andre, said a little bit ago when you talked about sort of like hijacking establishment infrastructure. That is something that we advocate for damn near every episode, or at least every episode where we talk about elections, because it's true. You need the coalition. As much as I love Bernie and wanted Bernie to be president and think it would have been good had he won the presidency in 2016 or 2020, he was not going to be able to get done the things that he wanted to get done because we simply do not have the infrastructure within the Senate or the House to get those things done. We need to get people to win, again, these down ballot races and slowly build up our numbers within this establishment so we can eventually take it over. And that's something that Marx advocated for in his writings too, to bring it back to theory. But
yeah, it's always an uphill battle for progressives. It's never going to be easy. We're sort of characterized by not being happy with the status quo, and if we want to get things done, it's I think as Jon Stewart put it, it's endlessly knocking on locked doors until they finally open, or maybe just kicking them down. But that takes a lot of time and will not happen in 1 or 2 or 3 election cycles. It takes a lifetime. I mean, people during the civil rights movement, the several that we've had in our country's history, many of them died before any actual progress really happened. Many of them died before they actually saw schools be desegregated. It is what it is. Like, that is the sad story of all of human history. You work and you work and you work, and eventually you die. And maybe one day your great grandchildren will be able to reap the benefits of everything you work to do. But it takes a long time, and I don't know. People have a lack of scope, I guess.
Yeah, people have very short political attention spans, right? Women's suffrage, that was like forever until it actually happened.
Hundreds of years, right? It was like 100 years.
Of years. Yeah. These things don't just happen again in 2 election cycles, and people like to treat it like they do, and it's just fundamentally wrong. You gotta lock in.
People were arguing against slavery before the country formally began. You know what I mean? Like, it takes a long time to get these things done. And people will take sometimes direct, sometimes violent action against those institutions. And sometimes that doesn't even work. It takes a long time. And I wish more leftist types really understood that and would be willing to just, start walking.
Contend with reality.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that the people that share our politics sort of need to consider. Like, to bring it back to Jimmy Carter a little bit, like how I sort of said he had a temperament that was fundamentally unfit for politics. Like, he came into Washington and he was like, I don't want to hire any of you people. I'm going to use my team from Georgia. And also, I don't like hanging out with politicians. I don't fuck with politicians. So I'm just going to like vibe by myself. And also, I'm not going to like try that hard to convince you of things, because like I'm an engineer and like statistics and math make sense to me. It's like, hey, the planet is getting hotter, and if we just like don't use our heaters and wear a sweater indoors, the planet will get a little less hot. Okay, guys? And that just super ineffective. Just like no one really listened because he couldn't get the message across. And like Tip O'Neill, the guy who was a speaker at the time, there's like this great interview with him that I love, where he's like, Jimmy Carter is like the smartest guy I ever met, but I couldn't work with him. He was a Democratic speaker. He's like, I could not work with the guy. Ronald Reagan disagreed with him on everything. Me and him drank a scotch. We got it done. Like people on the left, if they want to be able to accomplish the things that they want to accomplish, they got to stop like being like Professor Jimmy Carter, like yelling at people in that way, and like sit down and like why was Bernie Sanders worse at attacking Joe Biden than Hillary Clinton? Because he was friends with Joe Biden. He knew Joe Biden from the Senate, and they fuck with each other. Like it's that simple. And it's crazy that our politics comes down to like personal relationships of our politicians that
Yeah.
much. That's like really something that we need to consider. That's why, dude, like the AOC and Jill Stein, the sort of like discourse that's happening is crazy, bro. Like AOC has gotten flack for being a smart politician and like learning to work within the system and work with Nancy Pelosi instead of protesting outside her office.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like holding a sit-in outside of the most powerful woman in Washington's office, that's not going to help your politics that much, even if it looks good. You know, like I get
Absolutely.
so frustrated at people getting like they're allergic to political power in
Yeah.
a lot of ways. You know, that's just I guess a common theme of what we've been talking about tonight is that sort of frustration.
Yeah, and people forget with AOC especially that first of all, she's one of like what 6 people that are considered the progressives in
Mhm.
Congress, or maybe one of like 5 at this point because Jamal Bowman
Yeah, he's
lost this
gone.
race, and Cory Bush.
Oh,
I
Cory
think
Bush too, yeah.
Yeah, also, so maybe she's like one of 4 people at this point that's like really progressive in the House, and with that kind of power, you can't really do anything in the House. There's no filibuster like there is in the Senate. You can't like hold hostage the entire legislative process. All you really get to do is share rhetoric. And she's had bad takes before. Like I think her coming out and saying like I'm sticking with Joe Biden when Joe Biden was clearly on the outs was a bad idea. But ultimately, if we want to get real progressive policy through, we got to elect more people like AOC. And part of that's frustrating because I can only elect one person for one congressional House district. And even that, there's 700,000 other people that are also voting alongside me. But that's the work you got to do. In a country of 300 million people, it's going to take a long time. And getting mad at AOC, who's probably the most progressive person in the House, is just so unproductive, especially when you could be protesting outside of like, I don't know, Joe Manchin's houseboat or whatever. Like you could row out onto the lake and go talk to him. I don't know.
And it's like, yeah, there are more constraints to a national figure within politics than there are for you or I on Twitter. You know what I mean? And you have to understand that if you want to engage with with House politics on a meaningful level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I don't know. I think the thing about politics is it just gets more and more complicated the more that you look at it. And I think people like even when they're right, like even when they are coming from a good place, just fail to understand a lot of the nuance there. Like if someone does agree with you, but they can't really speak because they're district. Like look at Kamala on fracking. Like I don't think Kamala supports fracking, but she needs to win Pennsylvania, so she's gonna get out there and be like,
yes,
you know, like, do I actually think she would shoot someone that came into her house? Like, like she's got Secret Service to do that for her. I don't think she's got to worry about it, you know. But
like, golly, I just mentioned that thing about just like AOC and just like House progressives having to watch their rhetoric more than somebody on Twitter. The president there are a lot more things that they could be doing when it comes to presidential rhetoric in this election. We've talked about it a lot, but they can't do what like X person on Twitter or Reddit wants them to do. You know what I mean? There are moderates that they do have to win over that would be off put by aggressively progressive rhetoric, you know?
Yeah.
Like the buzzwordy type of progressive rhetoric.
Yeah, I've been a huge proponent of like trying to frame progressivism as patriotic, as a sort of like restoration of like American ideals of like FDR, New Deal, Great Society sort of stuff. Because oh my god, I remember seeing like this stupid tweet. I think I've mentioned it before, and there was someone was like, "Oh, do you think Israel has the right to exist?" And some like red triangle name was like, I don't even think America has the right to exist, bro. And I was like, okay, dude, like that's gonna pull at 0%. Like that's gonna pull worse than like it's gonna pull worse than like dude, it just like what do you think we can what do you think we can say to people that are like sort of sympathetic to our views, but that do just kind of feel hopeless or like we're not going to go far enough, or they're just like that sort of like academic type revolution mindset? Like, what do you think we could say to them to get them to be a little more pragmatic?
Oh boy. I mean, uh, I think, like you said, their hearts are in the right place. It's often just a fundamental misunderstanding of how the American political system works. I think the one good thing that we have going for us as people on the progressive left is that throughout history, we are on the right side of like every issue ever. I mean, you look back to like, the Stonewall riots were the first step towards like modern LGBTQ rights, or we look at protests in the 1980s against apartheid in South Africa. Students were being treated back then the same way students protesting Israel and our involvement in that conflict are being treated right now. And it's good to know that we're very likely on the right side of history, but also if we want to get anything done, if we want to make any progress whatsoever, we got to interact with the systems that we detest. Like, yeah, I also theoretically disagree with the existence of bourgeois nation states globally, but that me saying that, like, borders imply the violence of their enforcement doesn't mean that we're not going to have a southern border anymore. We should advocate against sort of reactionary politics in that way, but we still got to interact with the systems as they're presented to us. Ultimately, we're born into a society with rules and norms and a history, and sometimes it benefits us, sometimes it doesn't, but we're implicated in the system nonetheless, right? We none of us have clean hands, but it matters how they get dirty, and non-engagement is a choice within the system. As we've said on our show, if you happen upon the lever in the trolley problem, choosing to not pull the lever is still a choice in and of itself. You're still making a moral decision. No matter what, you're making a choice. You'll be implicated in some form of politics. I'd rather get stuff done than not at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, that's a great point, and I think that's a good point to start wrapping up on. But I wanted to ask you guys just one more question from a creative perspective. What advice would you give to other young people interested in politics that might be going into like the YouTube or podcasting space?
Oh my goodness. Well, if you've got good opinions, which starts with just being well researched and actually kind of being a student of these things, then honestly, it's not too hard to just start. That's what we did. That's how we got our start. I think we put like $500 into just the start of our entire show.
Oh, it was less than that at first. We had to wait till Patreon money came in to really put money in.
Yeah. So like maybe like $300 into actually getting the equipment to start our show. Do it in my mom's basement, you know what I mean? And not everybody may have access to that, I understand. But what I'm trying to say is there's a lower barrier to entry than you think. And if you have good ideas, good opinions, good takes, people will be receptive to that. You just need to stick with it and put like an earnest effort into the content that you make.
Yeah. I mean, I would say in terms of like algorithms and platforms, they reward consistency. So if you're regularly posting things that's going to help you, obviously, again, if you have good opinions, you should do it. If you have bad opinions, if you're on the right, stay away. Just don't even show your face on the internet.
Yeah, it would suck.
But if you're interested in this kind of thing, I think consistency is key. But also, we were talking about this before we went live. Never take yourself too seriously. I think posting on the internet is a fundamentally unserious endeavor. And if you're talking about politics as we do, you talk about very serious things, historical trends, people suffering. But at the end of the day, you're just a human being talking into a microphone. And the other people on the other side of that listening to you are also just human beings that will form their own opinions and things that they may critique you on. So don't take yourself too seriously. And make sure you're having fun with it. If you're not having fun with it, if your heart's not in it, don't do it. It's not worth it. Don't do it to pursue fame or if you think you'll make an enormous amount of money, because you probably won't. Just do it because you like to and because whatever the content is actually interests you. I think that's the key to being happy with what you make and not feeling too hurt if people don't like it or if you don't get as many views as you want.
Yeah, and especially within politics, right? It's so genuinely important for your content to come from like an earnest and honest place, right? And like you said about not forcing yourself to cover things that you don't want to, that's especially doubly important within politics, because if you don't really want to get into something or there's this issue that's going on that you don't really know about, kind of throwing your hat in the ring would, one, just not be honest, and two, just kind of open yourself up to just more, to just bad down the line, misinformation, maybe even bad takes, and just overall, most importantly for content, a worse performance when it comes to delivering it, a worse product for the consumer of it.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome note to end on. Thank you guys for joining us. Everybody, go check out the Head in the Office podcast. It really is a great show. Like if you're someone on the left, if you're not someone on the left, I think this is like one of the best places to get your news. The commentary is really awesome, and I can't wait to see like the other stuff you guys come out with.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having us. It's actually been a great
No,
time.
of course.
Thanks for having us, and good luck in Florida. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, for real. I'm praying for you this election cycle.
Oh, thank you guys. I'll see you guys later. Good night.
All right, bye.